Okay, and welcome everyone. This may be everyone. I know a few couldn't make it today, so let's go ahead and get started. I have a few things that I am prepared to show you, but I want to start um, with everyone here and kind of go around and see if you have any specific questions, and then maybe you have questions in common and we can look at those. So, Christian, let's start with you. Anything come up for you in the last week?
Of problems.
Oh, just questions or anything you're curious about.
Oh no, I couldn't get the to work. I've I've had this problem before. I don't
Which
know why it doesn't work.
which tool was that? I didn't quite hear the.
Elevation profile.
Okay, we can look at that today. I played around with it this morning and it was working, so
Oh,
uh,
okay.
yeah, but we can look at that. Laura, anything for you?
No specific questions for me, actually.
Okay,
Um, I got through the assignment, so I'm curious to hear if there was more things getting up
okay,
in this Q&A. Just looking.
okay. And how about you, Jakob?
The same as Laura. I also completed the assignment. I haven't sent it to you yet, but I don't really have any specific questions.
Okay, great. Well, I'll
Oh,
share my
actually,
screen.
Kurt, I had
Yeah.
one question, but I think
Huh?
it's quite obvious. It just said in the assignment that we had to show a screenshot of the study area. What's it called? 1 second. Well, I think you meant another layer. Oh, I could have found this before I raised the question. Sorry.
I
The layer properties for the
Yeah.
aligned terrain and the aligned study area.
Oh
But I
boy, yeah, that's a typo. Yes, so everyone who's turned it in got figured out what I meant. I guess I meant yeah, land cover and terrain.
great,
Yep, sorry about that.
no problem.
Okay, so let's look at the elevation profile tool here and keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully it wants to play with us today. So first, one can go into the layer that you want to use to represent the elevation surface. So for example, I can open up the layer properties for my colored terrain and switch to this elevation tab. And here I just want to check this box that tells QGIS it represents the elevation surface. And I can change the way this will appear in the profile. So I can just choose a simple line to start with and click OK. And I turn on the elevation panel by going to the view menu, elevation profile. It opens up like that. So I can zoom into maybe an area that I want to draw a profile for, and I can then choose this capture curve button, which allows me to just draw a line on the map. So for example, I could start here and draw and finish my line, and I get the elevation profile. So that's for my colored terrain here. So if I double click on this colored terrain layer in the elevation profile, it will open up layer properties to this elevation tab. It's a shortcut. And I could also try styling this as fill below. And here this morning I already played with this. I set the style for this to be a gradient fill instead of simple fill. I set it to gradient fill, and then I chose the color ramp that I used for the terrain. And then I also inverted that so that the highest elevations would be at the top. But click OK and click OK. And let me draw another line here. So now it draws the elevation profile as I've styled it there. And you could do, I could add the, since I have multiple layers all pulled from the same source, that terrain data, I could go into another one and tell QGIS that this also represents an elevation surface. And this one, maybe I just want to give it the black line. And so now I could draw a third profile line across here and turn this on. So now I get two representations of the terrain across there. And as you move your cursor back and forth within the profile tool panel, you'll see the dot along my line move. So it's telling you where you are within the, along the line within the elevation profile plot. And this has a measure tool. So for example, I could measure the distance across this lake right here. I could click and measure that the total length is 146 meters. You can also turn on snapping so it will snap to parts of the line, and you can measure the distances between peaks, or you're already getting the height because of this y-axis, but you can measure any direction within this profile plot that you'd like to. And this can be exported out as an image or a PDF, just as an image. But you can also, I can't remember if this is in 330 or 328, but it's now supported in the map canvas. So if I create a new in the print layout. So if I create a new print layout and I add my map here, is there, that's a 3D map. It must be in 330. Yeah, it must be a new feature in 330. So there's a new feature in 330 that lets you add the elevation profile as an object on a print composition. So we can look at that. That's the essentially what you have for this elevation profile tool. And if you have other data, if you had roads, for example, crossing this area, you could use this other option here, capture curve from feature, and you would just highlight the road layer in the table of contents and then click on one of the roads that you wanted the elevation profile for, and it would create the plot.
Great. Do you know if this is also available for, I think my version is 322?
It is not.
Okay.
This
And not as a
was,
plugin either.
there is an elevation profile plugin that's been around quite a while that actually has some other features that aren't in this native tool now. So yeah, this profile tool plugin you should try, because this will allow you to open up a similar panel and create an elevation profile plot. It doesn't, you don't have to set up anything in layer properties. This just has its own interface. So if you're not up with the current long-term release, that's what you can use in the meantime.
Can you control the axis on it? You don't want it exaggerated, since I don't know if that's going to look good, but
Yeah, let me see. Are there controls in here for stretching? That's just the tolerance. You can zoom in and zoom out of the plot to look at things in more detail. but I don't believe you can adjust the X and Y axis at this point. But I will say that this is a very new feature. It's only been out for, less than 6 months. So I know there's a long wish list of new features that the developer is collecting and working on. So I expect that's one of the things that will be created eventually for this. Whenever there's a new feature in QGIS like this, it gets a lot of attention for the next few releases of QGIS, as usually it's in its kind of very basic form initially. So now I'm in 3.3.0 here, which is the most recent version of QGIS, and I'm just going to set up the same thing here. So yeah, I copied and pasted these layers in, so they have all the same settings, and I can go to the elevation profile tool and do the same sort of operation where I see what was wrong. I had this digitize with curve. It doesn't work with that. It has to be just the straight digitize with segment for creating this line. Okay, so there we go. And then, so now that I'm 3.3.0, I can open up a new print layout. Add my map. And here is that new tool, add elevation profile. So I could add my elevation profile below the map. And there is a tool in item properties. When you have the elevation profile selected, you can copy the profile from the main QGIS canvas so that you get to see that in the print composition. Of course, I just digitize the line, and that does not show up on here. So you'd want to use this with something where there was an actual feature on the map that you could see that related to the elevation profile, because we're missing that here. But that's something you can look forward to when you start working with 3.3.0 or beyond.
Kurt, just to be sure, is this part of the assignment also doing the profile?
No.
Okay.
This isn't part of the assignment. This is just yeah.
Just for fun.
It's a valuable tool, and it relates to terrain and raster data. So it's just something I wanted to show.
Sure.
So because the analysis we're doing in the course shows you a lot of features about working with rasters in QGIS, but there are other things that you can do in QGIS that aren't part of our specific workflow. So thought I would just share some of that.
Sure. Do you have any examples of when you have used it?
The elevation
Or
profile
cases?
tool?
Yeah, where it has been useful?
Yeah, I've used it for showing elevation profiles of hiking trails or bike routes, for example, where you have a bike route and you can show the elevation profile for that ride. And so that's the only thing I've used it for so far. But and then with the profile tool plugin, when I am working on hydrologic analyses, where when you do hydrologic analysis and you're working with this elevation data, one of the procedures you go through is filling sinks in the DEM, because there are sometimes pits in the DEM that stop water flow, and they're kind of artifacts. And so there's an algorithm in the processing toolbox that you can use to fill those sinks. And so you can use that profile tool plugin, for example, to then show the profile of the DEM of both the filled DEM and the raw DEM before, and see the difference in the profile. That can be quite useful. And Kristen, you've joined. I just want to check before we move on. Do you have any specific questions that you would like me to address before we move on to other little topics here?
No, not yet. I'm just opening QGIS because I do have a question. I just have to formulate it. So
Okay.
later maybe.
And yeah, one of the questions that came up last week was about archiving data and about the converting to the ASCII format, which I didn't show during the class. And I was going to mention that if you do want to save data out to an ASCII format, what you would do is use the Google Translate algorithm. So you can find that, you can access that in a couple ways. You can go to the raster menu to conversion, and you find this translate algorithm. So this is basically just a command line tool that now has a graphical user interface built around it. And so, for example, we could choose the land cover aligned, and then we could, for the converted land cover, we could save it to a file and choose from the list of formats, which is quite long. They're in alphabetical order. Close. There's ASCII ASC files right here would be the output. So we could call it land cover aligned, and it will be an ASCII raster. And this is, again, a GUI wrapped around a command line tool that comes with Google. And so one nice thing for the tools like this that QGIS has, they'll give you the command line syntax for that down here. And I'll show you how you could use that. So here I'll just run this. And before I do, this Google Translate is a pretty powerful tool. It lets you convert a raster with many different settings. So you could override, you could reproject it up here. You could assign a no data value, and no data values are common in rasters. Rasters always have to be rectangular in extent, and sometimes you may have data values in that rectangle where you don't have data, and so those get to be called no data cells. And no data cells in a raster have a specific value, such as -9999 or something like that. And so you can assign a specific no data value here when you're converting this to a new format. You can also choose the output data type. So you could convert, if you had a floating point raster, for example, you could convert it to integer, or vice versa. So you can choose what the data type will be here as you export. Otherwise, it will use the same as the input for the output. And if I click run here, it will output the new ASCII raster. And I just want to show you, we open up Windows Explorer here, and whoops, and let's look for that. Here's that land cover aligned ASCII raster. And first you'll see that if I highlight this in the original is about 5 megabytes, and the ASCII equivalent is almost 3 times as big. And it is just a text file. So it's a very, very simple file format. So that's why I think it could be useful for archiving. It's been around a long time, and it will, in theory, probably be there for quite a while. So I could open this with a text editor and see the raster, and it's going to just give you the number of columns and rows, the coordinates for the corner and the cell size, and then it's simply the data values. And so you can see it's a very straightforward format. So you can see all the land cover class values in here. And then as part of, so to introduce this tool that I just showed you a little more, Google Translate, there with QGIS, you get built in all these different utilities. So GDAL is a library for reading and writing different raster formats, and it's built into QGIS. And so it's built into most GIS software, including ArcGIS, Google Earth, many others. And so it's a fantastic library because it basically allows you to convert between all the different raster formats that are out there. And it comes with a series of command line tools. So the one we just worked with was Google Translate, converts raster data between different formats. So you can click on one of these and you can get the help for this, this is help for the command line running of the tool. So if you've never seen this kind of documentation, it's not super user friendly. You have to dig into it and know what you're doing, but there are some examples of using it in a couple different ways. And so there's help like this for each one of these commands. And the nice thing about these commands is that they're very fast to run. You can run them programmatically. So if you have big data sets, or if you have to batch process a bunch of rasters, running these from a command line shell can be much faster than doing them from within QGIS. And if you, for example, I'm on Windows here and I installed QGIS via OSGeo for Windows. So if I go to all my programs down to OSGeo for Windows, where I find all the shortcuts to QGIS, there is this OSGeo for Windows shell. And if you click this, it's just going to open up a command line shell. But this OSGeo for Windows shell is pre-configured to recognize all these commands. So you can open up this OSGeo for Windows shell and, for example, type Google Translate, which is basically the tool we just ran in QGIS, and you get the help for it. And if we wanted to run this tool, we could run it from the command line. And when you run these tools via command line, you have to enter these little flags. So -OF is output format, and the value here is AAI grid, which is the code for ASCII grid. But then I simply put in the input and the output. And so this would translate what I just did, the land cover align TIFF, to the land cover output ASCII. And so I can hit enter, and I've done the same thing that I just did in QGIS. So now I will have a second copy of that land cover output right here. So I just did the same thing in the command line that I did in QGIS, and you can see it comes out the exact same file size. And Christian pointed that out last week. So thanks, Christian, for reminding me that you could do this via command line. It's a great way to process data. It's very efficient.
Yeah, I just rediscovered it because it also has, I don't know what you call it, PDAL on
Yep.
it. So it's quite powerful.
Yeah, so all these things are a little nerdy, like and how you pronounce them, you can get into big fights with people about that. Everyone has their own opinion about how to pronounce these. So you can say GDAL, Goodle, Gadal, there's people pronounce it in all kinds of ways. It doesn't really matter, but it stands for Geospatial Data Abstraction Library. And so the one Christian just mentioned is PDAL. And so people call it Poodle because it sounds like the little dog. And it's a point cloud data abstraction library. And there's another one called MDAL for mesh data. So these are all little libraries that just transfer data between formats, which can be kind of sound really boring, but it's really how QGIS is able to read and write all these different formats so well. And all the utilities that comes with it, you can use via the command line, but they're also the same thing. If you open up the processing toolbox and you find this GDAL section, all these tools in here are just GUI versions of those command line tools. So raster conversion, you'll find the translate tool here, which is the same one that I found here, Google Translate. And so for any one of these, as you fill out the tool, it'll give you that command line equivalent. So you could then see how you'd set it up in the GUI, and it can kind of show you, it can kind of teach you how to start using this via command line if you're interested in that. So Ann-Kristin, are you ready with your question?
Yeah, not quite, but I will ask you anyway. I have two questions. The first one is, can you tell me if a raster file has more than 3 bands, how do I see the 4th band in a raster file? For example, RGB, and then the near infrared band. I
Okay.
can't find the near infrared band because I don't know where to.
I have an example of that. So, so this is a multi-band raster. It's not part of our course. It's one I actually use in my Discover QGIS book. But it's a Landsat image of an agricultural area. And when you bring in a multi-band image into QGIS, it will show you the bands that it has. So this one happens to have 3 bands. It could certainly have more, but this one has 3. So band 1 is red, band 2 is green, and band 3 in this case is near infrared. So we can't see the near infrared with our naked eye, but it has a lot of information about vegetation health and things like that in it. So if we look at the layer styling panel, you'll see that this comes in with a multi-band color. And if I open up layer properties for this multi-band image, it's going to here in the information tab show me all the bands that are part of this image. So if I had one that had 4 bands in it, it would show me that it had 4 bands here and give me the statistics on each one. But if I want to change, what I can do at this point is change how this is shown by changing the band combinations over here. So it defaults to showing the red through the red channel, the green to the green channel, and the blue through the blue channel. But remember, this band 3 is the near infrared in this case. I happen to know that because I processed this data years ago and have used it in courses. So, but that will be in the metadata for the data that you obtain. So if you're using Sentinel or Landsat or something, you should get some metadata that tells you about the different bands and what parts of the electromagnetic spectrum they represent. But here I can go in and I can tell QGIS that I want to show the near infrared through the red band. So that would be band 3. And then I'm going to switch this around to 3. So 3, 2, 1. So the near infrared is going through red. And so anything we now see as red on the map is coming from that near infrared channel. And then green is still green, and red is now being shown through the blue band. So in QGIS, you can only show 3 bands at a time. You may have 8 bands in your raster, but you can only show 3 at a time, and you can choose what the band combination is. And there are well-known, useful band combinations on different satellite platforms. and you can Google those and find what those are. This one, in this case, this 321 is the band combination. We call it a false color composite, because we're showing the near infrared through the red channel. And we can only show these 3 bands because everything on the computer is basically composed of red, green, and blue light. And so here you can just choose which bands you're going to send through the red, green, and blue channels to show it on a map. And so you can, if we had 4 bands, then we'd have a longer list here that we could choose, and we could choose different combinations. So if 4 was near infrared, you could achieve the same effect by going 421 in your case, I believe. And so we get this view of the data now, which gives us more information than we could get just with a true color visible light rendering of the data.
And can I see only one band? Can I turn off the bands?
Yeah, you can. You can go in here and you can choose like single band gray.
Yeah.
And then you could just choose band 3.
So
And then you could, but it's going to just show it as a black to white in this case. I think if we choose single band pseudo color, we can again choose which band we want to look at, and then you could choose your color ramp, and so you could choose to look at just one band at a time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And my other question was, when I did the assignment, I couldn't find the hillshade. I had it in Danish, and I used I Googled how to find it and what to do, and then I did something else than you told us to do. I went up in the raster menu and the analysis, and then I found the lysskygge, the hillside, and then it said, and then you should save the file. And when I did that, the heights were saved as color values instead of meters of heights or whatever it is. And I couldn't find the GeoTIFF format, so I think I just saved it as a TIFF format with RGB bands and not this.
Well, a GeoTIFF
value.
is just a .tif file.
Yeah, I know, but what happened there when I saved it? Why did I change the heights, the information in the cells from heights to codes for color?
Well, if you ran the hillshade tool, it creates a hillshade image. So I think
an image with color values.
So you chose this tool here, I think.
Yeah, something like it. Yeah.
But it would have been in Danish.
Yes,
and so I could choose terrain aligned as my input for that, and take all this, and I can just save it as a temporary output, or I could save it as
and then I said save as.
Yeah, I can save it as a TIFF.
Yeah, and when I did that, there were no heights anymore, and then
the
rest of the assignment was wrong. So I'm just trying to figure out what happened and how can I make sure it doesn't happen. I think I have the answer. I just do what you do in your assignment, but
so when I do this and I run this tool, it creates this. It creates a hillshade image. Yeah. So what I showed you to do is just how to render the elevation data as a hillshade. Yes. But there's also this tool that allows you to create a hillshade image. And so, yes, at this point, it does not have all the elevation values anymore. It's just a picture of the terrain, basically, with shadows. So, yeah, you don't have any elevation values in this. It's just for display only. It doesn't have any of the elevation data anymore, and it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
So, but it's fine, because now you have just a file on disk that's the hillshade that you can just use over and over again. So.
But you can't make analysis on it anymore.
No, it's for display only. You can just view it. Exactly.
Display. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So, but it should be fine, because then that shouldn't affect going into the raster terrain analysis section and running slope, for example, because
No, but it affected when I used the color ramp. It came out differently.
oh yeah, you can't apply a color to this.
Yeah.
No, you just leave it as it is.
Yeah.
And then you would apply colors to the terrain like we did.
Yes. Go down to the heights again.
So here's your hillshade, and I put my colored terrain over top. And then I'm just going to apply a blending mode to the one that's on top.
Yeah.
And I get the same result.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if you create a hillshade layer on disk or you just have a copy of the elevation data rendered as a hillshade.
Mm.
It just depends whether you need that hillshade on your hard drive or if you can just live with it just being rendered in your QGIS project as a hillshade.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's quite important that when you do the raster analysis, that you do it on the heights and not on the color values.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. So if, for
so
example,
you-
if yeah, you get a very strange result if you try to
Yes.
run slope against hillshade.
Yeah.
It will be very weird. So because slope should be run against the terrain, not the hillshade. So
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. So you always have to just pay attention to
Yeah.
what tool you're running and what the proper input to that tool should
Yeah.
be.
Yes. Thank you.
Mhm. Since we're talking about hillshades, there's also this plugin. Did I mention this last time? Terrain shading. You can install this plugin, terrain shading, and it just loads these tools into QGIS. And you can, it has a series of tools here for creating more customized, specific hillshade effects. It has a hill shading algorithm as well. And I believe this will look a little different. Let me see. Can't remember if this will. Yeah, it's a little more exaggerated. You can see out of here. So if I drag this below. So it's sometimes when you're trying to go for a really nice looking map of the terrain, running one of these tools for shadow depth or texture shading, etc., can give you a really interesting visualization of the terrain. So I just want you to know that that's an available plugin when you're working on this, and you might want to experiment with it and see what it does. It's not part of our assignment though. And the other thing I was going to show you today is, let me turn off some of this. And so here's the land cover layer. And there's another plugin that's useful when you're working with rasters. Sometimes you may want to edit a raster. And so there's a plugin called Serval. Serval. This is produced by Lutra Consulting. And so Serval installs a toolbar here. It's quite big. Okay, there we go. It actually installs two toolbars. And so if I, why is it active? Okay, there we go. So I have here's a land cover. Okay, so I don't know what I did. Now the toolbar is active. And so it has first like a probe tool. So if I zoom in to one of these, uh-oh, you just crashed. Ugh, that's annoying. let me just restart QGIS really fast. So basically this toolbar has a tool that lets you probe it. It's kind of like an identify raster tool. And you can then, it'll give you the value, and you can then type in a different value. Here we go. We can get this back. Let me get back to where I was. Here's land cover. And I just want to zoom in to an area where we can see individual pixels, for example. So let's say that this area here, maybe we have information that this isn't really tree cover, that it's actually grassland now, and we want to change that. We could use the Serval plugin to do that. So we could click on an individual pixel, and it will tell us that has a value of 10. And we can see, okay, 10 is tree cover, and maybe we want it to be 30 grassland. So you could change this to 30 and then click this edit button and click on one of these pixels and make all of these pixels have a value of 30 now. So you can go in and basically edit a raster with this plugin. So that can be quite handy. A lot of times we just work with the data we get, but sometimes you may have a raster that needs to have some small adjustments made to it, and you can use this plugin to do that. And I can also just undo. It has, where is that? Yeah, has undo. So I can just undo the cells that but only let me do a few of them. Well, I'll have to, at least that's not the aligned one. I will have to, normally that lets me roll back through all my changes, and it only let me roll back through a few. But anyway, that's a plugin that I wanted to show you. These are tools for selecting pixels. So you can use this to select raster cells by polygon, and you can digitize a polygon like this, and it will select the pixels that interact with that polygon. And then you could choose this value 30 and hit edit. Nope. I'll use this one, and it would change that whole selection to that new value. So you can do it pixel by pixel, or you can select pixels using these tools and change a whole group of pixels at one time. And this clears the selection.
But you don't have to make it editable.
No, it doesn't have an edit mode like a vector layer does. It just starts editing it and then saves the changes. And you can hopefully undo something if you didn't want to do it. And you saw it only let me undo a few of those pixels for some reason.
Yeah, I think there was an undo depth of 3 or something at the beginning. But
oh yeah, in the settings. Yep. So I might want to increase that. So that's what happened. So that's that. And then there's also the other thing related to this course is if you go to the view menu down to toolbars, you have all the toolbars that are either related to QGIS or plugins you have installed. And there is a native toolbar in QGIS called the Raster toolbar for basically controlling how data gets stretched. So these are just basically the same kinds of settings for controlling brightness and contrast in a raster that you get. For example, if we look at terrain aligned and we go into this min max value settings, these settings basically are now in here as buttons in the raster toolbar. So you can use the toolbar, or you can use settings in the layer styling panel to do the same thing. So there's sliders down here for gamma and contrast and brightness. And in the toolbar, those are buttons for increasing gamma, increasing or decreasing contrast. So these are just for styling the raster and how it looks. So you can just want to make you aware that there's a native toolbar for working with some of those settings. So you can either work with them from the toolbar or from the layer styling panel. So those were the few things that I had to show you that were just kind of, again, this is just kind of more informal and just more information for you that goes a little bit beyond the analysis we're doing in class, but shows you a few of the other tools in QGIS that there are for working with rasters.
I have a more general question. What is, if you right click on a layer, you can either duplicate or you can copy it. What is the difference between those two?
So duplicate, if I we'll make a copy and load it right into this project. So if I duplicate this, I'll have another copy of this appear right below it. Copying this puts it onto the clipboard, and then I can open up a new version of QGIS like this, and I can right click in the layers panel and paste. And that will appear in the new QGIS project. So copy is for copying and pasting a layer between QGIS projects. Duplicating is for just making a second copy right here in the project.
And then if you make changes in one of them, the changes won't also apply in the first one.
Nope. I mean, if
All
you edit the data, then you're editing the data and that would show up. But if you're just working with the styling, yeah, that's only in that project.
Yeah, I think I tried this and I've deleted data in the duplicate, and it's also gone in the original.
Which it should be, because it's the same file on disk. You know, it's if you have a roads layer and you have multiple copies of it, and you delete a road in one, but since they're all the versions of it you have in your layer styling panel are pulled from that same data source, if you edit one of them, you're editing all of them. So
yeah.
Okay, so if you should make just small changes in the data and not just the styling, you should make another file.
If you want
Actually.
to maintain the original, then you should make one. Yeah. So what some people will do is when they're doing an analysis like this is save the original data, like the original land cover file that I provided you, kind of as in a source folder where it's the original data. And then maybe you have another copy like we've done for this analysis that we're going to modify. We reprojected it and we changed the pixel dimensions and we aligned it with the terrain. So it's now different than the source, but we still have the original source data that we could go back to if we needed to. So that can be a very good way to organize your data so that if for some reason you alter something that you didn't mean to, you can go back to the source and start over. It's not a disaster, in other words. Other questions?
Yes, I have one, but I was just trying to find the function, the name of the function, but I didn't really find it. But maybe you can help me. I just thought they were quite cool, the different styles for when two layers were overlapping, and you could either make them more bright or more dark. Or can you maybe show?
Are you talking about the blending modes?
Yes, exactly, blending modes. Yeah.
Yeah.
How what's the logic behind it? Because I was just trying randomly and it looked really cool, but the logic behind and
Yeah.
uh,
Let me,
which types are good for illustrating which things and stuff like that.
sure. Share my screen again. So these are, this is in the PowerPoint. So these are the 12 blending modes that QGIS comes with. I don't know why the description for darken disappeared there. But they come in 4 groups, first of all, so there's a little bit of the logic built in there. And multiply comes in the darken group. So when you read the documentation for multiply, it says the pixel values of the top item, in other words, maybe the hillshade layer, are multiplied with the values for the bottom item, the colored DEM. And so that's what it does. So you have to, some of these, it takes some experimentation. There are some now specific use cases for these, and the most common one that people will use is using multiply to create that color hillshade effect. Or you may have like a surface ownership, so a layer that shows who owns the surface of the terrain, and then you have a hillshade underneath it, and you want to combine the two, or combine the land cover with the hillshade. So you'd always use multiply in that case. And so you apply the blending mode to the uppermost layer, and it blends with whatever is beneath it. And in that case, since the solid DEM is below it, you just see the colors in that coming through the hillshade.
It's the color it multiplies, or is it?
Yeah, it's the color.
Yeah.
The color.
Okay.
The color of the pixels. And then for contours, we used overlay and soft light. We looked at those two. So these are in the contrast group, and so they but here when you're doing that, you're also starting to apply that over the hillshade, which has a multiply blending mode. So you're starting to combine blending modes in different layers together too, which changes how things look. But that's another common use case for contours in a layer. And then there are, but it's, I would say, so we have what, 12 different blending modes here, and I would say these 3 or 4 are the ones that are getting used 99% of the time. But once in a while, someone figures out a creative way to use one of these. So in my book, for example, I have a chapter on blending modes, and I show an example of using dodge to highlight certain features in a layer and hide others. And then there's another example I have of using addition to show road density in the way things are rendered. So I don't know if I showed you this slide, but so this slide on the right, this is vector data. So we have a dark map, and I had the OpenStreetMap roads for North Shetland here, and they were all styled with kind of a dark blue. And remember, the RGB values for a color are 000 is black, 255, 255, 255 is white. So here, with vector data, you can apply a blending mode at the feature level instead of the whole layer as we've been doing. So that means the blending mode is, we have all, at this scale, you have, especially in Copenhagen, you have all these roads, kind of their symbols are being stacked on top of one another, and they're blue. And so if you start adding those colors together, pretty soon you get to the point where those are 255, 255, 255, they're white, where a lot of them get added together because you're just adding those numbers together, and it creates this brightness effect. So it shows road density because you're kind of highlighting against this dark base map where there are a lot of roads features stacked on top of one another. And so this is a visualization technique that you can use that blending mode of addition for. So sometimes people find ways to use them like this, but it's not like there are recipes or much beyond what I've already shared you for common workflows.
But it was nice to understand there was just the colors adding up. It didn't make sense to me. There was a kind of data analysis, but it's a styling analysis.
Yeah, it's all about styling. And so I can't remember if I mentioned it in this class or another one, but these blending modes are available, for example, to things in the print composer. So if you have, let's say, your organization logo on a map, and let's say it has white around the logo, and maybe you could ask your designer to design one with a transparent background. But with these blending modes, you can actually use a multiply blending mode on that logo in the print composition, and it'll strip all the white out. So you don't need to ask your graphic designer to create a transparent version. You can use a blending mode to do it in a print composition. So they're available in lots of places in QGIS, not just for GIS data, but they have everything to do with style and cartography, but not the data. And so these are standard algorithms that were first developed for software products like Adobe Illustrator and the open source equivalents like Inkscape and GIMP and Photoshop. But QGIS was the first GIS software that had these built into it. They've been there for quite a while. And so you can do some interesting things with them for sure. That's some of the stuff I cover in the data visualization class that I teach. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, on nerding out on styling, that would be a good class to take too. Good questions. So our hour is almost up. Is there any other thoughts or questions? Nope.
So for the assignment we have to hand in here tomorrow, it's 2 screenshots of maps and then 2 screenshots of layer properties, right?
Correct.
Wonderful.
Yep. You got
Great.
it. And yeah, see you at the same time tomorrow for the second half. All right.
Yes, see you. Bye.
Bye.